Hi everyone. I recently made a video outlining the theory of the poisoned pawn variation of the Winawer variation of the French defense. I'll put a link to that video in the description below. So I wanted to find a grandmaster game that continued where our theory left off. So we're going to look at the game Fuentes versus Moreno from Lima 1999. And we'll go through the opening pretty quickly since it is explained in my other video. So it's a French defense, and here after bishop b4, this is the Winawer variation. Okay, the pawn on e4 is under attack, so it pushes. Black attacks the base of the pawn chain. White provokes the bishop. An exchange takes place. Now the pawn on c3 supports d4. Knight e7, queen g4, and this is the poisoned pawn variation. So white is targeting that pawn on g7, and one way to play is to castle, but an exciting tactical imbalanced way to play is queen c7, seeking counterplay on the queen side and giving up a couple pawns on the king side. So white takes on g7, rook to g8 saves the rook, queen takes h7, and now c takes d4, and black is threatening to take on c3 and fork the king and the rook. So knight e2 is the usual move to protect the c3 square. Knight b c6 developing very quickly, targeting the e5 pawn. f4 to protect it. Bishop d7 developing, getting ready to castle long. Queen d3. And this supports the c3 square and brings the queen back for defense, and white is now threatening to take the pawn on d4. So black beats him to it and takes on c3. Now you can capture back with either the queen or the knight here. Both have been tried. This game follows the theory that I outlined in my previous video, knight takes c3. And if allowed, this knight would like to go to b5, where it can sink into that nice outpost on d6. So black prevents that with a6. Rook to b1, activating the rook. Knight to a5, heading for the outpost on c4. h4, getting that passed pawn pushed, and there's an idea of lifting the rook to h3. Castles long, rook to h3, knight to f5, and that knight finds an excellent outpost on f5. This is where our theory left off. Okay, we stopped the position here, so let's see how this game continues. So white is going to very quickly push his h-pawn, and black is going to try to get some counterplay on the other side of the board. So h5, rook g4 with the idea of doubling the rooks, and the rook on h4 might even go to, or on g4 might even go to h4 and cut off that rook from defending the pawn. Or after the rooks get doubled, there might be rook to g3 in the air, attacking the queen, and the c3 knight behind it. So white plays queen to c3, attacking the rook on g4 and releasing his bishop. So his bishop is now defending this c4 square. So if black plays knight to c4, perhaps white can use his currently inactive bishop to take that knight. Rook dg8, the rooks get doubled, and white pushes that h-pawn in a hurry, h6. So black has to do something about it to stop it. And he falls back, rook from 4 to g6. Okay, and that forces the pawn forward to save itself. And now black can safely blockade it. g4 expanding and driving the knight back. The knight drops back to e7. And now we're at a crucial moment of how to proceed. A key move in white's position here is going to be bishop to d3 to hit that rook on g6 and support the pawn on h7. but he can't play it now because his knight on c3 would hang. And that's why white plays knight to d1. Very strange looking move. That knight can reroute itself to the f2 square. But the main purpose of that move is to remove the knight from being captured so white can concentrate on bolstering his h7 pawn and tying down some of black's pieces on the king side. There was a previous game before this one that proceeded with a4 for white. Perhaps they were intending to put their bishop on a3, but it didn't go so well after knight to c4, activating the knight on an excellent outpost. And that does cut off the queen from attacking the knight, so it does give white the opportunity to play bishop to d3, hitting the rook on g6, but the rook fell back to g7 and white got into a lot of trouble because black has a lot of threats in the position. He can play knight to g6, which will cut off the bishop's defense of the pawn. That's a strong move. But also there's a threat of knight takes e5, which releases the queen's attack on the c3 knight and attacks the queen simultaneously. Okay, so white struggled in that line. He didn't make that move. So back to the game. So knight to d1 is an improvement over the previous try. Rook to g7, just attacking the h-pawn. Bishop to d3 to defend it. And then knight to g6 to cut it off, as we saw in that other line. But white was prepared for this. He played the excellent move queen to h1, so protecting the h7 pawn along the h-file. Okay, then knight c4, knight f2 activating the knight, queen a5 check, king d1 looks a little scary. The bishop on c1 is preventing a mate on d2, but white is solid. Bishop b5 putting the bishop on a more active square, defending the knight. And now if you look at the board, black has 6 pieces. 3 of them are tied down on the king side because of the h7 pawn, and the other 3 are trying to generate some counterplay on the queen side. So there's some disharmony in black's position. His pieces are not cooperating. So because of that, white tries to open up some lines in the center of the board, and he tries to make use of the fact that his pieces are more mobile. So he plays the excellent move f5, sacrificing a pawn in order to break open the position. Okay, and his dark squared bishop on c1 will now get into the game. So black tried knight from g takes e5. He might have tried e takes f5, but then white would have had the excellent queen takes d5, posting the queen in the center of the board, and the black king looks vulnerable now. So instead, black tried knight from g takes e5, and then f6 was played, and you'll see the rook is trapped. There are no squares for the rook, so it's going to have to sacrifice itself for a minor piece. And it plays rook takes g4, knight takes g4, knight takes g4, and queen to g1, attacking the knight. And notice if the knight moves, there is a threat of queen to g8 here. So knight c e5 supports the knight on g4. Okay, and now white decides to just completely break open the position here. He gives back material in order to attack the black king. Black is unprepared for this attack, and I think this is the right decision. Rook takes bishop. Okay, giving the exchange back, a takes b5, bishop to f4, and now the threat is bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, and then queen to g8. So just to illustrate that threat, suppose black doesn't see it and plays queen takes a3. Well, then bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, and queen to g8 check. Wins the rook, and white will soon queen the pawn. This doesn't work. This defense doesn't work because white can just take it and then queen his pawn. Okay, so that's the threat in the position. So queen takes a3 cannot be played. Instead, black played knight takes d3. And then rook takes d3. And then black took off the pawn. Okay, so white was planning for that. He was deciding to get some open lines for his 3 remaining pieces to attack the black king. And there's actually a checkmate in the position now. Okay, white plays queen to c5 check. Okay, then king d7. And now in time trouble, white loses the thread of the position here. He doesn't find a checkmate. He plays queen to d6 check, which still gives him a checkmate that he doesn't find in 4 moves, but he missed a mate in 3, a pretty simple one. Queen to e7 check, king to c8, queen to e8 check, forces the queen to intercede, and then rook to c3 is mate. So white missed a mate there, but he continued on with queen d6 check, king c8, and then he could have repeated by going back to c5, king to d7, queen to e7 check, and found that same mate again, but instead he played queen to b8 check, king d7, queen takes b7 check, king d8, and now white sees a way to go into an end game with a strong advantage. He plays the excellent move considering he missed the checkmates. It's an excellent move. Rook takes d5 check. Okay, he breaks open the position because the rook on h7 is loose and he's going to win it. So queen takes d5 check, and no matter where the king steps, either to c8 or e8, there's going to be a fork that wins the rook. So black chose king to c8, and then queen to f5 check, king d8 takes the rook, and white is only a pawn up in the position, but black unfortunately has, his queen is probably on the worst square on the board. It has no checks for the white king, and so the black king is vulnerable and white will continue with the initiative. I checked it with an engine, and the engine gives white a plus 1.4, so it's unfortunate that he missed the mates earlier, but he's still in control of the position. Okay, black takes the pawn, white takes a pawn, queen c3, trying to get the queen to a better square to check the white king. It's threatening to come to f3 now and fork the bishop and king. Okay, but of course there are some checks. Okay, and we won't look at this in detail since the game could have been over long ago. Okay, so now white pins the knight, threatens to win it. So black has to give a series of checks here. He can't do anything after king to e2. There are no more checks. The queen has all these squares covered. Okay, so black's going to lose the piece. White takes it. Queen to b1. Queen f7 check. Okay, and white forces the king forward. And then forces a queen trade with queen to b4 check, forking the king and the queen. So black resigned because white would easily win this endgame. All right, thanks for watching the game.